All right, welcome everyone. My name is Vishesh. I'm one of the software engineers in our global teams where we get to work on all or most of the new stuff. And again, worked with a bunch of organizations across Asia, just trying to help them realize what their projects are and how we sort of build them. This talk is designed for people who've had some experience with bots, who've been to a lot of one-on-ones and introductions and different sort of elements of this. This is more about what's the next step. How do you manage a bot that you've already got? How do you deploy it into production? How do you start from scratch on designing, for example, new experiences? What does it all mean? So what we've done is, over the last sort of 12 months or so, we've been on this journey as Microsoft where we've kind of overhauled a bunch of those tools and frameworks and SDKs and so forth. So this talk is really going to hopefully save you a week or two or three of figuring out what's changed and how everything's kind of evolved, and also give you maybe some hints or just tips on what are the things you can do differently to have much easier experience when you're kind of building bots and deploying them into production. So a quick show of hands. How many of you have actually built bots before? Even they've been proof of concepts? Cool. Anyone who's never built a bot before in this room? OK, cool, fair. So I guess last year I was up on stage here as well, and we talked about what are bots, how do they work? And one of the conclusions that I kind of derived from it was bots are effectively just apps. And if I were to draw that parallel with other apps that we've been using for the last 20 or 30 so years, you think about building a simple application or even using it. You think about what happens in that scenario, right? You start off by achieving an event that gets triggered to some code that's written somewhere. The next step is to effectively fill in all the details that are required to then carry out or complete an action. So if I think about this scenario here, all I'm doing is going to a Air New Zealand website or Qantas or whatever, filling in all the details that I need to get to where I want to get a list of options of flights that I can choose when I'm planning a trip to Gold Coast, for example. And I guess it'll be fair to say that all of that is largely deterministic, right? You have a flow, you're following it. It's mostly designed for happy parts. Nothing wrong with that. It just sort of reduces the amount of complexity that's required to kind of design that software system. On the other hand, if you think about conversational apps, right? Again, all of us being humans, we sometimes don't say the whole thing properly that we want to. You might have scenarios where you're driving to somewhere or you're at home, and you might just say, hey, Alexa, I want to build something, or I want to fly somewhere. But you don't tell at what time. You don't tell on what dates. You don't tell your location or anything else around that scenario as well. So if you think about the parallel that I'm trying to draw between traditional apps and sort of these conversational apps, a lot of that workflow still remains the same. It's just that you have to put in more effort to derive an outcome from a conversation. And if you were to sort of think of it traditionally through a much more, I guess, mathematical or sort of algorithmic perspective, you're really looking at something that's a little bit probabilistic. You don't have clarity around what that looks like. So it's all about understanding what that really means and how we can design for scenarios that evolve around these two large concepts, comparing it to the ones that we've already been building and these sort of new experiences that involve voice and text and so forth. And again, last year when we reflected upon some numbers as well, right, there's been a lot of hype. If you look at the hype cycle itself, there have been a lot of bots. A lot of them pretty average, and a lot of them that have been successful are actually operating at a very large scale as well. If you look at some of the more sort of developing economies around the world, a lot of their business happens on these chat platforms. I remember a stat from last year where I think WeChat does about $10 billion worth of business on their platform, or facilitates that business on their platform, which is huge, given how early in that hype cycle we are with this platform. So 30 million plus messages passing through just our Azure bot service. And imagine how many more frameworks and platforms there are out there that are processing a similar number, if not less. So, and if I talk about the sort of conversational AI journey for Microsoft, We've been through about 3 versions already. We're announcing the 4th version next week at Ignite as well. So I'll sort of try and spend the next sort of 40 minutes giving you a sneak peek and also showing you the right things to be worried about, right applications to think about when you're designing something. But one thing you'll notice on the slide, which is really unique and interesting, is that that last element there, everything that we've done with our conversational AI elements is giving you as much flexibility as possible. Right from the platform you choose where you want to host your code, all the way down to how you engage with your audiences, you have that flexibility. And that's what the intent is when we imagine the sort of next conversational AI stack for Microsoft itself. So let's get down to basics, right? When we start building a bot, we choose a language, we choose maybe a template to go with, and then we start just playing with it, writing some code, and deploying it so that we can consume it as well. But one thing that was always missing from every bot talk in the past was how do you make this real? How do you think about that as a software solution? Because it's great that you can download some SDK, write some code, you've got a bot running, but what happens next? Enterprise bots require thinking all across the whole application lifecycle, just like any traditional software system. So if you start with planning, right? If you think about how we imagine writing these conversational experiences, what's important? Just like any other software system, you need a multidisciplinary team, right? So you need someone who understands UX. You need a designer. You need some developers. You need someone who understands how to deploy software in production, manage it, maintain it, and so forth as well. So that setup is still the same. Understanding your business logic, understanding what your goals are or your sort of business rules are, that's equally important as well. It's not about just setting up a FAQ system and just sort of hoping for the best later on. Again, at the same time, you need to be able to measure your success and criteria and so forth as well. But one more thing that I guess through the last 12 or 18 months of working with solutions is that people often forget how important a persona could be and how important designing conversation flows are. And to help with a little bit of that, what we've done is we've sort of built this tool called Chatdown, which effectively, it's a format. It's a markdown, simple format where you effectively define. If you're in the early stages of building a bot, you start off by explaining what you want to achieve out of it. And you give it a few examples. You for example, have a happy path flow. This is where we start, this is where we go next, and so on and so forth. So in my case, I was building a donburi bot because I love eating donburi. And so one of the things in there was having a nice welcome message and straight away getting to an action, which is find me a don around me. So that's all I wanted, and I've got some options, and I say thanks, and off I go. So that's the basic conversation I want to start with. And then we'll worry about the more complex sort of workflows or complex conversation flows later on. I run it through the tool, and it gives me this hydrated conversation back, which I can then play into my emulator. So when I'm going out there building a case for the business or an enterprise, or if I'm designing a flow, I'll give this to the developers who can then build this in real logic. So you have content publishers doing their thing while developers kind of working on the actual logic behind it. The next thing is, of course, if you want to enhance that personality, you want to also give it some unique logos as well. This is nothing smart. It's just the emojis you have on iPhones, for example. So I just grabbed them, a few different colors, different platforms, and that's what it is. And then when you think about designing cards and authoring them, again, this is just JSON, right? You don't need a developer to sit in there and design that for you. You much rather have a UX person or a designer in there designing those pretty looking cards for you, which you can then add to your source control and address them. Has anyone used adaptive cards before in this room? Okay, if you haven't heard of it before, it's an open source platform, open source framework, sorry, which allows you to author your rich cards once and make them available on whatever platform you're on. So it goes back to that whole design concept where your designers are building that content once, but it's available across all the different platforms where your users might be. Let's have a quick look at how all that sort of sits together. So I've got this simple chat application that I showed you before in my slide, where a chat file. which effectively defines who the user is, who the bot is, and so on. So it's simple markdown file, which I've just defined some variables into it. Now, the next step that I'll do is I'll just open up the command prompt. I'll zoom in. I'll do. And the next thing I'll do is chat down name of my file and just output it out to demo.transcript. Perfect. So I've got that file in there. Let's reveal that in Explorer so you can see what it is. And I'll just double click on that file so it opens it up in our sort of this brand new emulator. We've just sort of reimagined what an emulator would look like, made it more extensible, and allows you to kind of have a lot more features attached to it as well that I'll show you throughout the presentation. But for example, as you can see, I just defined some basic flows, and all I've got is this nice looking transcript file that shows me what a typical conversational interaction would look like. Pretty easy, but just having those tools and tool sets in place just makes the experience so much better. Now, if you also noticed one thing, this card doesn't look that pretty, but it conveys the message, right? So what's the next step from there? How do we make it pretty? As I was showing you in my slides earlier, I've got this JSON file, which I'll just copy and go over to Adaptive Cards. So adaptivecards.io is the site. And what it comes with is a visualizer. So I can literally plug in my code, and it shows me how that card looks like on the web chat, on other platforms like Teams and so forth as well. And I can have a look at how all of those different platforms behave to what I've got here. What I can also do is, apart from editing the card itself, I can edit the host config. And what that means is I can define a design language for my bots and my cards, where I can decide what the font would look like, how would the spacing work for that card, and so forth. So it just gives you more richness to the way you author those cards as well. And again, we've tried to make things as simple as possible when it comes to actually building them. So you could do, for example, let's pick up. OK, let's maybe pick up this one. And if I remove it, as you can see, the subtitle font becomes normal. But if I go back and change it lighter, it sort of changes that as well. So it's, again, super interactive, easy to play with. And then you copy this off and put it in your source control, and off you go. So again, everything's very much with the mindset of keeping the developer sort of at the forefront of it and being able to manage that code base as well. Cool. And so once you've kind of envisioned or planned, what you want to build for your bot itself, the next step is kind of looking into what are the ways in which we can build. I asked the question earlier in the session that how many of you've already worked with our bot framework before. We had the V3 version of the SDK, as we call it, which was at the core of our sort of conversational AI stack itself. But looking ahead, we're announcing the V4 of that SDK pretty soon. The best part is it's all open source. So everything that I talk about, you can actually go and validate that right now. But what our focus has been is just making sure the SDK is modular. And it's designed for extensibility from the ground up. So we went back on the drawing board. We thought about how we can really create an SDK that's more flexible, that thinks about it as a platform as opposed to an opinion of how you should be implementing bots. And as I work with more and more customers using V4, the conversations we are having is what makes sense for that organization to build on top of our SDK, which allows them to really define how they deliver and build bots as well across their stack. Another thing that you'll notice is more languages. So we're working very hard to ship all these 4 languages pretty soon. So C# and Node will be available for production workloads by next week or by end of the month. And we're working very hard to get Java and Python up to speed as well. But the essential idea being that if you learn some concepts in some language, they'll be consistent across all the 4 languages as well. And as I showed you before, there's a new emulator as well, which gives you much more rich information. And we'll sort of play with it over the next sort of 30 minutes as well. So let's have a quick look at what this new framework looks like, what's changed, and look at a few samples as well while we walk through it. Cool. So let's start simple with Visual Studio. Again, the experience is quite similar to V3 if you remember in the past when you're creating a new project. If you download the Vishesh template, you'll effectively get this bot framework tab, which in my case comes with 3 different options. But the one that I have just built on my Visual Studio is V4. So I'm just using a simple Echo bot in Visual Studio using C# as my language. So let's see where it actually starts. So you go off in your startup file, and all you do is you inject the bot that defines all the business logic. You pass on some credentials that will be used by the bot, and you just execute your logic from there. So let's have a look what's inside the Echo bot. What we've done there is, you'll notice we've changed some analogies there as well. In the past, it was called something else, but now we're calling it on turn, which makes it a lot more easier because every conversation turn is the flow that goes from a bot to a user or user to a bot. So it's about just having this simple synchronous analogy across the whole framework as well. And at the same time, all you're doing is, if you remember from the past, you have activity types, and you had them in the past as well. So your conversation updates, your delete user data, your invoke, and all those methods still remain the same, or the functionality is still there. It's just that we've streamlined a lot more by passing it with activity types directly. So if I just simply run this and have a quick look at how it performs. Awesome. So we've got that up and running. Now, another thing that I would sort of introduce is the .bot file itself, or the extension, which effectively defines what the bot has. This one's quite basic, but we'll go into some of the more complex ones pretty soon. But this file gives you a way of defining what services your bots are connected to, defining app IDs and passwords, and having a much more consistent framework that's more shareable, that makes it a lot more synchronous when you're deploying or injecting new values when you go from staging to production and so forth as well. So it gives you that flexibility with a very consistent format as well. So if I go to my file system and double click, it will open that file up in the new emulator as well. And if I start off a new conversation and I say hello, for example, again, it's a simple Echo bot, performs exactly the same, returns back with a response. Nothing fancy there. Now, one of the other requests that we kind of received a lot from the developers building bots was how they could, instead of going through this whole inner dev loop of writing some code, running it, checking it on the emulator, what if they could do all of that through the console as well? So we've just released the open source console adapter that allows you to exactly do that. Build your bot, write your logic, and test everything within the console itself. So again, a much more easier way of again, writing code, but then also doing testing against it as well, and then being able to kind of write these modular unit tests as well for each of those components, because all you're getting is a standard output. So let me show you what I'm doing here. In this case, what I've got is, instead of choosing the bot framework adapter, I'm just using the console adapter, which is an open source class that you can just import a library as well pretty soon. And then I've got this main dialog, which sort of handles all the functionality, which in this case is just Echo bot as well. So it's just got a small statement, and it returns back whatever the user's kind of typed into the command prompt. So let's have a look at what it looks like in action. So if I just do, I think it was npm start. There we go. So as you can see, instead of going through the emulator, I'm just doing everything from the command prompt. I can say everything that I want to. And I've got this keyword that I'm detecting quit, and whenever someone says quit, I just exit out of it. So this allows you, this gives you the flexibility of writing much more modular experiences and just being able to package them together and ship them away somewhere else by just exporting everything as standard output as well, if that's how you want to kind of lead the dev team practice. Cool. So what I just showed you there was an Echo bot in C# and an Echo bot in Node. if you notice, the code was quite similar to V3. And all I had was 3 or 4 lines literally explaining how the adapter works, what's my config like, and then effectively writing some logic which just returned back the same prompt that the user sent in. So the experience is the same, the language is the same, and the analogies are pretty same as well across both those languages. One of the other requests that we often got was authentication. If you've been keeping a track of the updates, authentication, so OAuth support has been available for the last 6 months, and we'll be shipping it with V4 as well. So you'll get that consistent experience where all you have to do is go to the Azure portal, define your OAuth config. We've already got a whole bunch of settings and options that you can already use. So we've got pre-built sort of integrations for different platforms, including GitHub and Azure AD. But what you see on the video is what that experience looks like, because what you've got there is a simple sign-in card, which just pops up whenever you have any authorized requests coming in. You click on that, you complete the authentication with the provider, you come back in, and you're automatically logged into that system, and you can handle the tokens whichever way you want. And again, the whole framework's kind of open source as well, so you can see what's going on behind the scenes with the SDK itself. And it's very well documented as well, so I wouldn't be demoing that, but again, it's a lot of config and just making sure you've got the right tokens in the right places. I think beyond authentication, again, every bot is intelligent, right? So everyone wants to build a bot that's intelligent, even though the most popular ones so far are the ones that are more transactional, that achieve exactly what they want to do. If you look at Alexa, one of the most popular functionalities on Alexa right now is just playing music. I just want to play some music on my Alexa, and that's why you see that whole transactional element being more popular, because you know what the defined outcome is. If you think about intelligence itself, you've got these multiple services in Azure, and I think there were a lot of different sessions throughout the conference that sort of touched on some of those services. But if you think about conversational experiences, what you're looking for is language, you're looking for speech, and now you're looking for something more complex as well, like adding some more personality to your bots, and how would that look like? So all of these services are in GA or will be GA by the end of this month. Couple of them are under the labs initiative that we've got for cognitive services. One of them is Conversation Learner, and the other one's Personality Chat. So I'll try and demo that towards the end once we've got some more time. But I'm sure most of you would be familiar with Q&A Maker. How many of you have heard about it, seen it before? Yeah, OK, quite a few. If you haven't seen or heard about Q&A Maker before, what it does is that you feed in some questions to it. And those questions could be from a web page, could be a PDF, could be an Excel spreadsheet, could be a lot of different formats. And it effectively reads the document, finds the question-answer pairs, and makes it into a conversational experience that you can literally plug into your code and go into production with that as well. So it's effectively using FAQ-based question and answers to then create a conversational experience. If you want to go a step further, where you want to understand what the intent of some utterance or some user input was, you then look into natural language processing. And our natural language processing engine is called Language Understanding Intelligence Service, or LUIS for short. And LUIS effectively takes in some input and helps you define what the intent of that specific input was, and what are the specific entities that you can extract from it. So if you remember the first slide that I showed, or the second slide when I started my presentation off, if you're building a conversational experience, you want to be able to understand what the user wants to do. So the user says, I want to fly to Gold Coast. You figure out that, OK, Gold Coast is the destination, and their intent is to fly somewhere. Now, what are my missing pieces? My missing pieces are finding out from where they want to fly to, and what are the dates. That's it, right? So you are able to sort of get that with the help of natural language processing engines. And again, some of the more common scenarios are using Azure Search, where you've got lots and lots of data sitting in different knowledge bases, and how do you extract them? And all you're looking for is just a search box. My favorite is how a lot of organizations are effectively replacing their search boxes with much more chat-looking conversational UI elements, which is fine because it gives you more data about what the users actually want to get out of the website as well. So we weren't able to capture the data before from a conversational perspective. And so if you think about integrating all these intelligent bits and pieces into your bot itself, the next step is really plugging it into every single task that you carry out from your bot itself. So we've kind of introduced this new sort of element within the SDK itself called middlewares. Nothing different to what we've been used to in .NET or even Node as well, where the idea really is every request that comes into your bot, it effectively attaches a middleware class to the adapter. So everything that goes from your bot to the user or from the user to your bot, you are able to sort of complete an action on top of it. It could be something as basic as capturing telemetry. Or it could be for logging purposes. You might want to add some additional fields to it based on what was the origin of the request. Or you could do something more intelligent, which is translate as well, because translation is something, if you're building a bot in English language, but your audience speaks multiple languages, you would want that translation to happen when the flow comes in or when the user's text comes in and when you send back the output. So you want that to happen on both those instances. And the slide does a good job at explaining that as well. So you have a request that comes in, you effectively translate that information, you complete some logic, and on the way out, it effectively translates that again and sends that response back. So that's the classic translation sort of scenario. This is what it would look like visually, like depending on what you've said, it'll effectively grab that information and take it from there. Let's have a look at a couple of middlewares as well. What do they look like, how easy or difficult they are to build using the V4 SDK. So I've got a couple of samples, one of them, of course, being in Node, and the other one being in C#. So let's have a quick look at it. Cool. So let me zoom in on the file structure first. So what I've got here is simply my index.js, which is the entry point. And as I showed you before, that's where I define where to go and what to do as per my previous examples. Bot.js just has some logic behind the scenes. And then I've got this translator middleware. Again, this is also open source. You can attach it to your project and start using it. And so what happens is whenever there's a request that comes through, my code base over here looks at that request coming through and then passes it over to onTurn context here. So whenever I come to the onTurn, I've got a turn context object, and I'm checking if it's a message, then process the next sort of set of logic in there, which effectively prompts the user saying that your current language code is either Spanish or English, so ES or EN, and based on that gives you two options, so you can choose between that ES or EN language, and based on your response, it changes the state of the user at that point in time. So once that's defined, what I've got here is this translator middleware. So it's probably easier if I just run this and show you at different breakpoints on how that looks like. Here we go. So this is my emulator. I've just effectively clicked on run on Visual Studio Code. And I'll just type in something like hello. Now what you will notice is as soon as I said hello, my code got triggered at this breakpoint, which is translator middleware. So that kind of talks through the slide that I was sort of explaining, where every message that comes through passes through my middleware because that's what I've attached to my code over there. And I'm doing that within my index file where I say, hey, adapter, make sure you use this translator middleware. And here are some preference properties, and here's my translator key. That's it. Nothing fancy. Super simple to kind of integrate. And whenever the message comes through, if the type equals message, I'll effectively carry on with my middleware logic. So let's just hit run. And as you would notice that my default language was set to English, but in this case, maybe I want to change it to ES, which is Spanish. Now, as soon as I clicked on ES, which was a suggested action, it triggered my middleware again. Let's go off and run that component. And the next place is effectively, I've got this should translate logic, which effectively checks if the user's requesting to change their primary language or default language. So I'll go through that as well, go back to my emulator, and you'll notice that my responses are now coming in Spanish. I'll talk about translator or translation, machine translation and speech at my talk tomorrow with Madoka as well. So feel free to kind of, if you're looking for more deep dive into translation, then we can have a chat during that session as well. But similarly, I'll just keep going on, and I'll trigger the method again, and I'll finish off that logic, and I'll come back, and it comes back to me with some more options as well. So I can then choose to change my language. And once I change my language, you'll notice that my actual sentences that are being outputted from the code itself is not being translated. Because I've written my bot only to cater for English language, so I've just added this translator middleware that handles the inputs and outputs and works out really well. Cool. So that's how translator works, or that's how middlewares work within a node. Now, what I've also done is, if you remember the adaptive card that we were looking at, oops, not this one. There we go. So this adaptive card, what I've done is I've taken this adaptive card, I've written in some code, which looks like this over here. So I've effectively tried to render a file over here, sorry. So I've got this JSON input here that's effectively just showcasing what that adaptive card looks like, for example, if I wanted to use it. And then I've written some logic here which effectively checks for, which effectively checks for if there was a user added to a conversation, I just want to send the welcome message card back to my user. So let's quickly run this as well. And again, as you can see, this is not executing or completing an action, it's just sending a response back. And sometimes you might just need that. If there's a trigger word, or if there is a quit or a cancel word that if you're in some dialog flow, you want to exit out of it, this is a really good way of doing it as well by catching it through middlewares. Now, let's restart the conversation here on the emulator. And as you'll notice that I've got that adaptive card kind of rendering really well. It's using the middleware as well. And whenever I say hello, it then goes off and executes some logic, which could effectively be just that as well. Cool. So one super complex translation sort of style middlewares, but one something really simple that effectively is checking for every new user that's joining a conversation. Cool? I briefly talked about Lewis, I think, a few slides ago. So again, effectively what it tries to do is help you understand what the outcome the user is trying to get to and help you understand the intent behind it as well. We've actually integrated a lot of experiences into it as well now. So if you go to Lewis today, you can enable sentiment directly from the portal itself. You can apply speech priming as well, which is a work in progress, and you can actually use it today. So if you're using voice experiences, it's actually quite easy to integrate sort of the speech APIs directly within your Lewis framework so that you can not just sort of transcribe from speech to text, but also get a response with the intents. Again, I'll talk about this speech stuff in more detail tomorrow as well. So more than welcome to join the session. But the other things that we've sort of been on is, the service has been in GA, but we're also kind of trying to get all the compliance certificates as well. So far it's GDPR, ISO, and HIPAA compliant. You've also got multiple languages across multiple regions as well. So quite a few options there. Now, similarly, as I said earlier, Q&A Maker allows you to convert your FAQs into a bot experience that you can easily integrate into your code and get it integrated really well. Again, this service is in GA as well, so and it creates that service within your portal or within your subscription, so you have full access and control over the data of how it's being managed and who's hosting it and so forth as well. But one of the most common sort of requests or questions or sort of engineering challenges we face is if you've got too many different divisions building a single bot. As a big organization, you might have one personality of a bot, give it a name. But then you might have 10 different divisions building or contributing to the source code together. So how would you manage that experience? Where you've got multiple Lewis models doing your natural language processing. You've got multiple Q&A makers that are querying different FAQs and so forth as well. So to help with that experience, what we've done is we've kind of introduced this new tool called Dispatch, which again is a command line based tool. You import in some information, and it helps you basically act as a router, where it helps you decide if you were to go to Lewis model A or B or Q&A maker or whichever else you might want to use. So let's have a quick look at Lewis a little bit. I'll show you a quick query, then I'll show you what I've got in my Q&A maker. And then we'll come back and look at what dispatch is and have a quick run through of what the process or what are the steps involved to get through dispatch and get it into production. Cool. So for those of you who are not familiar with Lewis, this is what the portal experience looks like. Before that, you'll just have to go into Azure and create a Lewis cognitive service so that you can grab that key and plug it into your Lewis model here. By default, you get a 7-day free key to use as well, so you don't have to start with that paid option or that actual Azure portal experience, so you can directly start from here. I have got a simple Donbury style Lewis model here with 3 intents, one of them, of course, being none, which catches everything that's sort of not detected by other intents. And I've got a find intent, which is all about, hey, can you find a Donbury near me? Or can you find a chicken Donbury or a pork or some katsu or whatever? So it grabs all those specific entities within those utterances. The other one I've got is greetings. And then, as I said, I've defined some entities as well. So if you were to use it right now, all you have to do is go into the keys and endpoints section. Again, we've improved a few things here. I've enabled Bing spell check by default, and I've also kind of added verbose information in there as well. And if I click on this endpoint, I can actually test it in the browser itself. This is what the endpoint looks like. It maps to an app. It has a subscription key. And right towards the end, I can define what my query looks like. So I can just say, hey, what's your name? And it should give me a JSON response back. I'll just quickly zoom in. It says, that's the query that came through. This was the top scoring intent, which is greetings, with the confidence about 66%. And then I had sentiment analysis, making sure or helping me understand that most of my request that came from the user was actually quite positive. So everything's good to go. But maybe just because when people are typing something, they might just not misspell some stuff within the actual utterance itself. So I can just do what's your NAEM. Let's see if that picks it up. Now, since I had enabled Bing spell check, it automatically went off, and within the same request, in a millisecond or so, it was able to alter my query to exactly what it should have been, and give me a top scoring intent, and then also give me a sentiment score as well. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the score or the confidence score is not that high for that specific intent. So in order to improve that, I can go back to Lewis, go to my build phase, and start reviewing those endpoints, that utterances that have come to my endpoint. So I can then go off and make sure that I'm assigning them to the right intent, and then saving that information, and then I can train it again. So it's all kind of part of the portal experience. Or if you want, there's also full CLI support as well, so you can manage it through your, some workflow as well if you like to. Now, on the Q&A maker side, what I've done is I've got a simple Q&A knowledge base, which I think only has 2 questions. And the truth's being spoken, I think, on the Q&A. If you like C3, this is not the best place. But once you've got that information there, You just want to publish that, and once I've got that published, I'll just be able to consume it as well through my code base as well. Now, those are sort of the two core elements of the services that I'm using right now. So if I quickly go back to my slides here, what we saw was effectively a Lewis model that I've just created, which is the second line there. I'm just using the dispatch tool to add that Lewis model to my solution. Next thing is to effectively do the same thing and add Q&A to that solution as well, and then click on dispatch create. And what I'll do is, in real time itself, it also allows you to refresh your model as well. So what this does is, once I've gone to my folder itself, which is the dispatch folder, I can effectively go ahead and run dispatch refresh, because I've already defined all the values that sort of define what my model looks like. So I've already got all the intents and all the information from my Lewis model and my Q&A maker. So I'll just go and say dispatch refresh. And then it asks me what name you want to give it. So I'll just say demo dispatch. And then I need to enter some more information. But just to speed things up, what I've got here is a folder that's already pre-created. So I'll just reveal that in Explorer and show you what that looks like. So I've got that folder in there. And in the end, once everything's exported and once everything is complete, it gives me this sort of web view of what all has really happened in this case. So as you would notice, it went to Donbury, which is my Lewis model, and it found 22 utterances with that information. Similarly, my FAQ that was coming from Q&A Maker had 2 utterances, and that was the other information that's required for it as well. And once I've done that, it also helps me understand if there were any duplicates as well. So dispatch kind of helps you really understand what's the best way of creating routing logic between different models and so forth. So once I've done that, this dispatch tool goes into my Lewis account and creates a new Lewis model. And this is what it looks like. So let me show you. It's basically called dispatch as the version over there. And it simply helps me grab a none intent if in case nothing's been caught. Gives me an intent that maps to my Lewis model, and then give me an intent that maps to my Q&A maker. So something extremely simple as that. Now, if you want, you can actually go in there and investigate what it actually is doing behind the scenes. So you've got, do you like sushi, or who are you, as 2 of those questions. So let's quickly go and play with the actual code itself as to what it looks like. So it's the same Donbury code base that I was working with before. So I'll continue using that as well. So I'll just say, hey, find me a Don around me. Again, not being super helpful because it's still work in progress. But one of the things you would notice, and that's the point of this demo, is effectively how it's gone through 2 different Lewis instances. So it started off with the first one, which in this case is my dispatch model. So within this new emulator, let me zoom out, this new emulator, I've got this inspector for Lewis model. So over here, I can exactly see what the raw response was from the Lewis model. So I can look at what the entities were. There were no entities that were found in here. And it found out that Donbury is the actual intent that I wanted to go to, which is my Lewis model. But if I find this to be incorrect, then I can go off and change it as well, directly from the emulator itself, and then train and publish as well. So once we figure out that I'm looking to go into my Lewis model and not my Q&A maker, I'll look at the next Lewis trace, which effectively goes and looks into my actual Lewis model, which holds a lot of the other information as well. So in this case, sentiment seems a bit negative, but that doesn't matter right now, because all I'm looking for is getting a response that helps me find out if I'm looking to find something or if it's just a greeting. As simple as that. Now what I'll also do is I'll just ask the bot, do you like sushi? Now hopefully, if everything's in place, this should reroute back to my Q&A maker. And it did. That's awesome. So again, if I were to show you the trace itself, it started off by me asking that message here, Lewis giving us a response which said, you need to go to the FAQ section, which is my Q&A maker. And once I get that response back, this is the Q&A maker sort of response that I got back with the knowledge base information in there. I haven't configured it in this file, but that's how I got this message back that, yeah, whatever, sushi's all right. So that's sort of the end-to-end flow of how this whole routing scheme works. And it's pretty critical for building some more complex experiences. Perfect. Now, the way this kind of gets realized within my bot itself is that I've got this services endpoints that I've defined within my .bot file over here. So I've got a bot configuration bot file which defines that experience. So I've got that Lewis config there, which effectively is my Lewis model for the sort of the Lewis element itself, not the dispatch model. And once I define that, it's able to help me retrain directly from the emulator itself. So that's sort of the basic idea behind it. And one thing that I sort of forgot to mention was that Dispatch is fully open source as well, so you can have a look into it and see what's going on. It's very well documented as well, so it's just that GitHub/Microsoft/BotBuilder tools. But I'll have the links towards the end of the presentation as well, if you want to have a look at it. So what we just saw was how you can use some of the new tools like Dispatch to basically help you route between different Lewis models and Q&A makers and so forth. But the other, I guess, common request was around how do you manage all these multiple services? How do you manage multiple bots? How do you manage your app IDs and passwords and your different environments and so forth as well? Now, as I showed you earlier, there's that whole MSBot tool, which allows you to write a .bot extension file, which effectively holds all the information about different services and the config information behind it. At the same time, you've got Lewdown, which allows you to bootstrap your Lewis models, define them in text, and then use the CLI tool to effectively deploy into an actual Lewis model sitting on Lewis.ai, which you can do through this Lewis CLI tool as well. And then you've got the Azure Bot CLI tooling as well, which allows you to really create bots and manage them and manage channels and so forth as well. So the whole intent and purpose of these tools, again, they're pretty descriptive on what they do, but it's about giving you that whole application lifecycle management capability where you can take these tools and script them up and put them in your CI/CD as well. Fully open source as well, by the way, if I didn't cover that before. Now, again, testing is something that I guess all of us have been trying to figure out. How would testing work for some of these scenarios? There are multiple ways of looking at it, because just like any other front-end / client-side application, there are multiple elements that you have to test or that you have to ensure sanity towards. So first of all, I guess the easiest way to start is using some of the tools that I've just showed you in the past half an hour, is really understanding how could you mock some of those elements when a user, when a design comes through from the designers by giving you a transcript file. How could you ensure that that transcript file is exactly the same as the outputs you're receiving from that bot at that point in time? So you could kind of script it up and add it to your CI/CD as well. Again, you can do unit tests, you can do integration tests and so forth quite easily as well, so it's quite open-ended. The other part is ensuring if your endpoints are giving you the right results as well. So we've got the direct line channel that I'll show you in just a few minutes as well, which allows you to really hit the sort of bot itself with a production endpoint and just be able to use it. And then you've got your traditional, Selenium and your debugging tools as well that are pretty standard across the whole, across any application really. And when it comes to testing out your bot, and if you've got testers or if you've got actual users, then you can directly use the emulator to then help people test the bot out as well directly from the emulator, and then train up the model and publish it as well as and when required. So it's quite powerful when it comes to actual tooling of it. So I think we've already seen the demo of how that works, so I'll just skip that part. And talk about publishing. So once you've kind of been through the journey of imagining what your bot looks like, building it, and then thinking about publishing it, this is, I guess, a few things that you have to sort of keep in mind when you're kind of building something around that experience. So a lot of that CI/CD stuff, again, treat a bot as a web service. So all of that stuff will remain pretty standard to whatever you already have, and gives you that full flexibility of managing that information as well. At the same time, using some of the new CLI-based tools as well allow you to integrate, creation of Lewis models, management of them, deployment of them, and so forth as well. So you can all add that into your CI pipes as well pretty easily. Now, if you remember from my first few slides, if you look at the whole conversational AI stack, one of the core integral pieces of it is the Azure Bot Service, which allows you to, well, the whole intent of Azure Bot Service is to help you really plug in some information. That's your bot code, which is sort of the code that's sort of helping you define some logic, but then help you get all those different channels as well. So instead of you having to have a developer on your team maintaining each of those channels, this is a very quick and easy way of getting that information into place as well. So let's have a quick look at what that experience looks like, and then we'll sort of look back into the last couple of slides and close after that. So if I go to my portal, I can go and create a new app. Now, once you've written your bot code itself, you would want to host it somewhere. So traditionally, it's been a web app in Azure or just a website hosting service that could be anywhere. Or it could be a serverless function as well, which is effectively hosting your code. Or it could be on-premises. We've got a bunch of customers now that are hosting their bot code on-premises, but they use the bot service for the richness it brings for channels and management capabilities as well. So you can kind of pick and choose different elements. Now let's imagine if I've hosted my bot code in some website or some hosting platform somewhere. The next step is to create a bot service registration, where I define the name of the bot and give it some basic configuration information. And I also give it a messaging endpoint, which will be something.com/API/messages, or whatever else you want it to be. And the way authentication works is that you'll have to create You'll have to create an app ID and password within your tenant, which you'll then have to enter the information in there. You can use the automatically created one, or you could sort of create manually as well if that's what you prefer. So I've got one already built, which is this Echo bot that I published as a website. And now I'm using the same bot registration service to help me deliver that experience to my users as well. So I can, first of all, I'll just show you the settings on what it looks like. This is my messaging endpoint, which is /API/messages. But then I also can add all the other analytics information, like application insights and so forth. And I can also add some OAuth information if I like. So as I was talking about it earlier, we've got a bunch of the auth providers already configured. But if you want to bring your own, you're more than happy to do that as well, because it's just using OAuth. Now the next thing would be to just test it, make sure my bot's running fine. I've got a smooth experience on my web chat experience, so I'll just say hello. And since it's an Echo bot, I expect it to just respond back by hello as well. So nothing fancy there. So that's sort of the experience that looks like. It'll be the same for every bot. And there are some other features as well that you can have a look at later on. But it also provides analytics directly from the portal itself, which is pretty handy. But since I haven't enabled them, that's what it looks like. Cool. Now, the sort of the last couple of pieces that are left is about making a connection to the users themselves. So when you think about how that looks like, you've got these multiple channels that you can configure. Now, instead of talking about them, I'll just directly show you from the portal itself on what it looks like. So I've got this channels tab in there where I can effectively pick and choose different channels. And we've actually got developers actively working on adding more channels as well, with more and more frameworks and platforms sort of creating open APIs as well for us to use. So in here, for example, I've enabled all of these. What I've also done is I've taken my Donbury bot and I've added a channel for it as well, which is the Teams channel, because maybe you're at work and you're looking for something nice to eat for lunch. So you can go off and get that same experience from within Teams itself. And all I had to do was enable Teams and agree to all the sort of privacy statements they have, read through it if I have any concerns, but accept and just literally add that channel. Another popular one is Direct Line. And the reason why Direct Line is very popular is because it allows you to build your own custom clients. A lot of people love having their own apps, mobile apps, for example, or they might have their own speakers, or they might have their own different way of sort of producing that experience. So in that scenario, you can use Direct Line quite easily to connect to the bot as well, because it comes with a REST API as well as an SDK to use. And then the last part, of course, being evaluate. Hopefully, some of you remember when I was showing you the Lewis demo. Once I go through an endpoint, I can go back to my Lewis portal and review all the utterances that have come through, or the user input that's come through. That applies to evaluation as well. So when you're looking at what the feedback is, how successful your conversations are, a lot of information is new, because we're actually tracking people on how successful my bot solution was, or our code base was, but at the same time, how many of those paths that users took was successful, or did the bot actually lead the user into a wrong path as well when they're going through that conversation flow? Was the user not happy with the conversation? So is there a way for us to escalate that to an actual human as well? So all those things need to be considered as well when you're kind of thinking about how successful a bot is. And sort of that kind of really explains some of those core scenarios that I guess we've been trying to tackle. Some of the more newer, I guess, scenarios that I talked about earlier, for example, is how do you add personality to your bots? Because once you've done all that logic building, you've built workflows, you've sort of helped people understand or deliver an experience, you might also want to add a bit of personality to the bot as well. And that's what one of the sort of experimental projects currently that we've got on the cognitive services is actually trying to deliver with it as well. So let's have a quick look at that as well. OK. There we go. So it's effectively just called Project Personality Chat, which just uses deep neural networks to help you give different responses for different personalities. So over here, I can set and toggle my personality. But what I'll do is I'll just say something as simple as, hey. And once I've done that, it comes back professionally. That's what the response looks like. But maybe in a much more friendly way, that's what the response looks like. And if you want something much more casual than that, that's what the response you get back from it. So you can configure these things, which is quite neat to do as well. So again, you can take it a step further as well, and you can just ask something more riskier as well. I hope it's fine. So something humorous, again, something a bit too casual, I guess. But then if I'm looking for something a little bit more friendly, which helps someone build a brand persona next to it as well. What do baby bots eat? Formulas. But something that's a lot more professional, maybe used by execs for an internal bot. You just keep it simple and easy as well as an experience. So a really good way of adding a bit more personality to it as well. So again, you can have a look at it online. Just search for Project Bot Personality, and it explains everything really well. So the last couple of minutes, just wanted to sort of wrap up by talking about the journey that I guess we've been through in the last 1 year of what does a successful application lifestyle management experience looks like for building bots. So you start off by planning and designing, and then you go into build, and you think about how you test it, publish it, use different channels, and then effectively evaluate as well. So a lot of content, I understand, but this is sort of I guess the conversation's kind of going in the right direction in terms of how we deploy or manage these solutions and treat them as software solutions when we're thinking about deploying them at an enterprise as well. All the information is effectively online. Everything's open source. Just search for bot framework GitHub on any search engine of choice, and you'll find a ton of information about it. Since we're going GA pretty soon with V4, you'll find all brand new samples and documentation coming to life next week or before the end of the month as well. So keep an eye out for that. But if there's anything else, more than happy to answer your questions after the session. Thank you. Any questions? Or you can come and chat with me later on. I think we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.